Hi everybody, I'm Cindy with Hats for Justice and welcome back. We're going to go ahead and get started with our first tutorial, which is going to be materials, and I'm going to explain why you need the materials and what they're used for. So we're going to go ahead and get started. First I want to say welcome, and I'm excited to be here, and I hope that you guys are benefiting from these videos, and I hope that they help out. Okay, so we're going to need a couple basic supplies that are just normal things that you need for crocheting, which is going to be your scissors. Just to let you know, I recommend these scissors. If you're looking for a new pair of scissors, I recommend these scissors. They're made by Fiskars. And the reason why I recommend them is because I have little ones at home that like to help mommy crochet. And sometimes little fingers like to get a hold of these, and they want to cut things. And I found that these are very, very safe because they have a locking mechanism on them, to where they won't open up. And then the locking mechanism, you just push it up and it releases the lock, and they're spring loaded, which I love tremendously because sometimes I struggle with opening and closing my hands. So this makes cutting so much easier. And then when you're done with them, you can just close them, you lock them, and again, they're locked and they can't be messed with by little hands. Okay, next is going to be, sorry, I need to move things around a little bit. Okay, next we're going to need a yarn needle. This is a normal thing that you need for crocheting unless you have your own way of tying or weaving in your ends. A yarn needle, that's what I use it for those ends that I didn't have enough stitches to overlap my rows to cover up my ends. So I use these to weave them in. So just a regular yarn needle, whether it's plastic or metal, it doesn't matter. Next, what you're going to need is you're going to need stitch markers. Of course, stitch markers are a huge thing. A lot of people, they purchase stitch markers, and that's awesome, but I'm a cheap mom that has 3 boys at home, so I try to buy as cheap as possible that will last the longest. And for me, bobby pins and safety pins. Bobby pins are actually my best friend because they're so easy to use and they're very, very cheap, which means you can go to the Dollar Tree and you can buy like hundreds of them for a couple bucks. And you want to make sure that you have a lot of them because when you're graph ganning, you have to make sure that you keep track of your stitches, and you keep a good count of your stitches, because one single stitch out of place or one extra stitch throws the entire graph off when you're crocheting it. So you want to make sure that you keep as good of track as you can as you're going along. So what I do is if I'm doing a graph that's, let's say, 50 stitches long, every 10 stitches I'm going to mark with my bobby pin, so that or my stitch marker, so that way I know exactly that I'm exactly where I am supposed to be the whole way through, and I don't have to do a row and then find out I made a mistake 3 rows before that. Okay? Another good thing to have on hand, it's not a have to kind of thing, it's just I recommend it because I find it very helpful, is just regular graph paper. And the reason why is because I love our designers and our designers are awesome, but some of them do make mistakes once in a while. We're moms, we're grandmas, we're aunts, you know what I mean? We're 50 million different people at one time. And if you're doing 50 million things at one time, sometimes things can get confusing and you can miss a couple squares when you're graphing it, when you're creating the graph, or you can put a color in the wrong spot or anything like that. So I always try to keep graph paper around just in case I find mistakes. Okay. The next thing you need is a pen, obviously, so that way you can keep track of things, you can write things down. If you need to mark things, whatever you need to do, if you need to, mark your graph off because you're done with a row, keep a pen around, or a highlighter even for marking your rows. But we'll get into that in a second. The next thing that we're going to need is another very, very basic. I'm so sorry, I've lost my crochet hook. Okay, so I'm just going to grab one from out of here from my little stash until I can find my other one. You're going to need a crochet hook. I recommend using between a G to an I, which is G, H, or an I, depending on your tension. That's what's going to depend on what you want to use. When you decide what hook you want to use, let's say you choose an I hook, you want to go up one hook size when starting your chain. So if you're going to go with an I, you're going to want a J hook to do your starting chain. And the reason why is because those starting chains can become so tight that you don't want that, because then if you do, at the bottom of your stitch, it's going to pull your graph inwards. So then you're going to have the problem where you're going to have to block it, and that's just even more pain in the butt from what I've read. I've never blocked anything, just for the plain and simple fact that everything that I do, I always go up one hook size on my starting chain. Okay, so when you decide what hook you're going to use, then you're going to have to decide what stitch you're going to use. There's three main stitches that are the most popular, and that is a single crochet, a half double crochet, and the Tunisian stitch. I believe that's how you pronounce it. For a half double crochet and a single crochet, you're just going to need a regular old crochet hook. For the Tunisian stitch, you're going to have to go with the Tunisian hooks. They offer lots and lots of them. This is just a normal metal one. They have some that have the long cords, so that way if you're doing the big, huge blankets, you can keep everything on that one hook, and it's got stoppers on the end and all kinds of stuff. They're really, really cool. I unfortunately do not know how to do the Tunisian stitch. I guess you could say I kind of struggle with the tension on it, so mine doesn't come out very good. So I choose to stay away from those. I am learning though. I'm working with a friend of mine who's teaching me how to do it. So as soon as I learn how to do it, I will make sure to make a tutorial for that. So, okay, so we've got our hooks and we've got our graph paper, we've got our pens, our needles, our stitch markers, graph paper, regular paper if you like to keep notes and that kind of thing. So the next thing we're going to need is we're going to need graphs. Okay, the graphs that I'm using in this video, I do not claim them to be my own designs. I do design graphs, but the ones that I'm using are the ones that I have printed off, and they are not mine. They're the ones that I learned how to begin with. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about graphs. I just want to make sure that everybody understands the ins and the outs and that kind of thing when it comes to the graphs. All right, so let's say you picked a graph, okay, and now you need to print it out, okay? When you're choosing your graph, you have to pay particular attention to the size of the graph. I have a guide that I will share with you guys in a link that I'll upload for you, so that way you can see the different sizes and how they vary and that kind of thing. I know for the small blankets, they start out between a 58 and a 55. Now, that's how many blocks you're working with. That's not inches or any type of measurement. That's just the graph itself. Okay, so you have to remember that. So looking at a graph that somebody's selling and it says it's a 50 by 50, that does not mean that it's a 50 inch by a 50 inch. That's not what that means at all. So make sure you keep that in mind, okay? All right, so when you pick your graph, you're going to say, okay, I love this picture. I love this graph. I'm going to go ahead and this is the one that I'm going to do. Now, when you go to get your graph, you're going to be sent a PDF file. That's how most of them do their graphs, is a PDF file. It just makes it easier for people who purchase them to print them out. And you're going to print out a pretty hefty pile of paper. For one graph, this one is, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8 pages, okay? And that's a lot of pages all at once. But now I'm going to explain to you why you get so many pages, okay? Your first page that you're going to see, and it's going to come up with, I'm sorry, I'm trying to cover up the name. You're going to come up with this, okay? And all that this is this is just a picture that's showing you what your graph it looks like, okay? And that's just so that way you're aware of what it looks like, okay? Your second page is going to be your graph with all of your lines. Like this is going to be like a pre-graph, okay? And this is just to show you what it'll look like when it's all together, okay? And all the different stitches and how the stitches line up and stuff like that, okay? Now, the next couple of pages, the rest of the pages are going to be a bigger, expanded picture of your graph. So like our first page is this, okay? And then our second page is this, where you can see that these two pages fit together, okay? They're going to fit together. And the reason why the graphers do this is because there are some people out there that can see these itty bitty, see those itty bitty little squares? There are a lot of people out there that can see those itty bitty little squares, but there are some people that can't. And sometimes it's harder to keep track of, especially if there's a lot of detail in it. It's harder to keep track of the changes and the color changes and stuff on these little itty bitty little graphs. So they make these bigger pages so that way they're easier to see your squares, okay? And then you have your bottom pages. And then normally you'll have one more page that'll give you your colors and tell you what colors you need. You have to remember when it comes to graphing, colors are completely and absolutely a personal choice. Even though, let's see, my Care Bear here that I have is purple, but I want to do it in a variegated color, so I can do that. So just remember that all of the colors on the graphs are completely and absolutely up to you. Okay, so I'm sure you're probably wondering why I have all of these pieces of these pages, these pages in plastic covers, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I am cheap. And I don't like to print a whole bunch because these things can eat your printer ink. It really can, because I mean, you got to think about it. This one graph is 8 pages, and that's a lot of black and a lot of color to make sure that it gets the correct saturation that the designer put on there. So what I do is I print out my papers and I put them in these plastic paper covers, the report covers. And the reason why I do that is because I discovered the most amazing idea ever. Like, I was sitting here one day and I'm going through and I'm highlighting and my colors are running together because of my highlighter, and my graph was just an absolute mess. And I'm like, how can I fix this? Or I did a row and I realized that 3 rows back I made a mistake, and you can't erase highlighter and you can't erase pen. So I'm like, how am I supposed to keep track of the fact that I had to go back 3 rows? But when I went back 3 rows, I only had to go 72 stitches into 400 and some, stitch graph kind of thing. So I came up with the idea of these plastic covers. Okay, because I used at the time a dry erase board, and I kept track of my rows that way as well. Okay, I'm a stickler for OCD type stuff when it comes to doing my graphs and stuff. So I came up with this idea of an erasable marker and a plastic page cover. Okay, now I'm going to show you why. Because let's say I have to go back 3 rows. I can take a paper towel or a dry erase marker or some Windex or just a wet washcloth, and I can wipe all of that off. So then I know where I'm at and where I'm supposed to be. Okay, so just grab you a dry erase marker. As you go through the rows, just mark them off as you go through. And then if you make a mistake, then you can just simply wipe it off and you can go back and start all over. All right, Well, that's pretty much all the materials that you need. I'm going to leave it at that so that way everybody can gather their materials. And I'm going to go ahead and get started on the second video. So we'll see you soon. Thanks.